Hi, I'm Angela Beyer, CEO of College Invest, and welcome to this episode of Inspiring Futures. Through Girl Scouts, you've learned that if you can dream it, you can do it. And here at College Invest, Colorado's education savings program, we help you get there. And you're never too young to begin to imagine your inspired future. So how will you impact this world? Will you run your own business, invent a new technology, or maybe even discover a life-saving cure? But wherever your inspiration takes you, a College Invest savings plan can help make your dreams a reality. Now, prepare to be inspired.
Kelsey is a strength-based writer, performer, supervisor, and career coach. She's got 7+ years experience in higher education. She believes in the power of stories, the impact of theory and practice, and the transformational potential of higher education for students to discover and pursue their purpose. With a focus on social justice and self-authorship, Kelsey helps draw connections, tell authentic stories, and spark courage as kids embark on their own self-discovery process and navigate the rigged game of finding a job in an uneven playing field. So I would love to welcome Kelsey.
Hi folks. I am so pumped to be here. I've been looking forward to this for months. I'm going to share my screen so we can get into slides, but I want you to know that I'm very, like I said, I have a lot of energy, and I'm very interruptible. So as we go through, please don't be shy to ask questions or just sit back and have a great time. That's fine. But my goal today is that we have fun, right? I know that this can be pretty stuffy stuff sometimes when you're like, tell me about your life and your career and how you potentially got there. That's great, but can we have some fun doing that? So hopefully we have a good time and you find some relevant resources and tools, because this is all tough stuff, right? We have a lot going on, and hopefully you can find some pieces from my story and resources that resonate with you. Okay. Awesome. Anything else, Katie, that we need to cover, or can I just launch into it?
I think you can go. And girls, if you'd like to turn your video on, please go ahead and do so.
Yeah, you're more than welcome to do so. And if you're like, Kelsey, I've had a long day. It's the new year and there's been a lot happening. Okay, you don't have to turn on your camera. I want you to be comfortable, right? I want you to feel like you can engage in the spaces you have the energy to. Here are some brief reminders, just because there could be a lot more folks in the room too. I'm seeing something in the chat box, which is exciting. Yes, absolutely. And then as we go out throughout the activities, then I will encourage you to turn your cameras on if you can. Sound good? Okay, great. All right, so turn on your cameras if you can, especially if you have pets. If you have pets, I will demand an introduction. Thank you very much. And I hope that you can ask questions, and we'll be doing polls and activities. So again, very interruptible. We want this to be a good time for everybody. Okay. So with that in mind, what are we doing? What is this human doing? Right? Again, I'm Kelsey. I use she, they pronouns, she, her pronouns, or they, them pronouns. If you have questions about that, happy to talk about that later too. As a queer person and a former Girl Scout, I think there's a lot of intersections in identity, right? And how we show up in the world. I also have ADHD, so that's also why I have tons of energy, and folks don't know how I do it. So any questions about those things, or ways that you can find mentors that maybe look like you or have certain aligned identities, happy to talk about. But this is our initial template for our next hour together. First, just a brief pieces about my story. I'll be asking questions to you throughout. A day in the life of a career coach, some myth busting. So some of you might have some fears about the future. I don't know, maybe just my students and nobody else. But my hunch is that you might have some fears about the future or questions. And then we're going to do some activities for what do I want to do with my life? If you're wondering any of those questions, awesome, you're not alone. And then some next steps and resources. Okay, awesome. So a quick sound check. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Can everybody access the emoji button if they can't access their camera? There's a little button that might say reactions. Yeah, Charlotte, I love it. Ooh, Sophie. Okay, Scarlett, everybody's doing a great job. Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure you know where those are, because that will be very helpful as we go throughout. Cool beans. Okay, so moving forward, let's dig into this gorgeous stuff. All right, so as I had that beautiful introduction by your leader, Katie, this is just a visual overview of my work. So I've actually lived in 6 states outside of work. So if any of you have been in Nevada or Washington, I saw there are about 3 folks not in Colorado. So these are all the states that I've lived in, but I've always wanted to live in Colorado. I'm very active in the LGBTQ community, and those are things that I tend to advocate for and get involved with. And I love kickball, softball. I used to perform on an improv comedy team pre-pandemic, and I have a lot of years experience doing this thing called helping students, right? So hopefully I've learned a few things along the way, and I thought it might be helpful to have a visual of my career journey. So if you can access the chat box for this next portion, I'm going to have you pull that up if you want to. And if you're like, again, participate as your energy allows. It's really okay. But this is a snapshot of my resume, right? So if you were like, I want to hire Kelsey for a job, this is what you would see on there. Obviously not with these graphics. Okay, that would be terrible. But if you saw my resume, you'd see that first in college, I was a resident assistant or advisor. So I worked with college students in residence halls at Western Washington University. Then I was a hall director. So I was in charge of students in residential buildings for 2 years. Did crisis response. I helped with conduct issues. So if students were like, I'm going to go party, and then they got in trouble for that, they'd come and talk to me. Not so great. I also supervised a lot of people. Then, after that journey, I was like, I thought I loved housing, but I'm not sure this is it for me, right? I know I want to work with college students. I know this is my jam, but maybe not in this capacity. So I decided to go to grad school because I found that a lot of the positions I wanted to apply for required a master's degree if you want to work in higher education or in a university or a college setting. So I went to this nerdy program called Bowling Green State University in Ohio. So again, Washington, Wisconsin, then Ohio. And while I was there, so sometimes if any of you are thinking about grad school, some of the programs will have something called an internship or an assistantship where you get hands-on experience in the field you want to go into. And I was a grad assistant in the Career Center, and I went, oh my gosh, I love this. I love doing presentations. I love meeting one-on-one with students. This is super cool. And I still get to build knowledge all the time of different industries or things we're noticing. So every day is different, and I love that. And then I started after grad school, I became an entry-level career coach. So I worked with the College of Arts and Sciences at University of San Diego for 3.5 years. So again, Ohio to California, what, right? I just knew I had different priorities for that transition. And I loved what I was doing, but again, I just missed mountains. So I was always networking and trying to get my foot in the door in Colorado. So I found myself getting in touch with Colorado State University through a conference I presented at. And now that's not my official title, but it's just easier to wrap your head around I'm an assistant director for career education. Okay, so I've been here since December 2019, and all throughout you can see it's like, oh wow, how has this changed? So in the chat box, and again, you can just feel free to share, what are some patterns that you notice, or what are some things you notice about this one resume, right? What are some things that you notice about it? And if you're like, I'm shy, I promise my job is to be awkward and honest. I'll tell you if you're wrong, okay? But what do you notice about this timeline? What do you notice? What are some things you point out? Do y'all think I knew I wanted to be in Colorado when I was a resident assistant? Yeah, let's see in the chat box. No, Charlotte's like, nuh-uh, absolutely not. Yeah. How long did I stay at each role? Yeah, about 2 to 3 years, right? Okay. Yeah, different experiences. I also had to move a lot, right? So going from Washington to Ohio to California, all over the place, right? Do you think that that's true for every person's career path? No, right? How many of you have an adult in your life that watches over you? I really hope so, right? Okay, we have some guardians. Okay. How many of them have had a job longer than 3 years at a company? Yeah. Okay. See if you raised hands. Yeah. Okay. So different folks have different timelines, right? And maybe they have different ways of approaching it. Also, some industries require you to move a lot, right? Higher education in particular. And others are like, nope, you have to get certified for a certain thing in one state and then you just stay there, right? And there's reasons for moving around. Yeah. So I just wanted to show this of like, hey, I'm figuring it out as I go, but also you can kind of see I figured out I knew I liked college students, but I wasn't sure in what way I wanted to work with them. Right? So that's how we kind of discover things one step at a time. I think I saw a raised hand. You are more than welcome to unmute, or if that was an error, that's absolutely okay. Great. Okay. So I just like to show this as an example of like, there's no one right way to move through a career, right? And sometimes things can change quickly. Other times, I just actually helped my mom celebrate her best friend's retirement of 45 years with one company. What? Right? So that means that based on my journey, her advice, if I was giving her career advice, I wouldn't only speak from my own lens. Right? Like she was like, no, this worked for me. I'm in Montana. There's not as many industries to go into. I have to stay with this one company. So, as a career coach, my job is not to only talk about myself and give advice because I don't know what journey people are going on. But it's to step back and say, hey, what's true for you? And how are you going to get to the next step? Not 10-year plans, because who knows in 10 years what we're going to do? We just know what's next and what do we need and what are our priorities for the next one. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So with that in mind, just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of how I ended up in this weird role. But some of you might be like, okay, but what is higher education or something called student affairs? No, it is not as interesting as the title may sound. It is not actually having affairs with students, okay? It just means that I work with college students. Okay, so that means that sometimes anything related to a university, so any business, including a university or college, has lots of different departments, right? Like you have to have the person that can run the housing buildings, you have to have someone who can do Greek life, maybe they're interested in sports. I'm not into sports thing, but some people are, right? Leadership, y'all probably would get very interested in that as Girl Scouts, right? So there's lots of different areas in a university, and career services is the one that I ended up choosing after exploring housing. And any kind of organization or like field that you want to go into. So what is an example of a field, do you think? Feel free to put it in the chat box. So if I say industry or field, what do you think I mean? Like what's an industry, for example? And I'll tell you if you're wrong, remember? Science. Yeah, you're like, I want to go into STEM. A category of a job. Medical. Yes, Abby, that's the most popular one they hear about. Education. Travel. Yes, I want to see the globe, right? So some folks are like, I want to go into law. I want to help animals. I want to do these different things. So in every field or industry, there is something called national organization. So they often will have conferences and universities, or not universities, conferences and different resources and things, or networking opportunities. So any field you want to go into, it probably has a national organization affiliated with it. So the one for higher education and student affairs is NASPA or ACPA, and it has something called the CAS standard. So that's a lot of jargon, right? Like that's a lot of acronyms. You don't need to remember those, but I have on here a link. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I think I want to work with college students someday. That sounds cool. I will send these slides afterwards, but this link is to the CAS standard. So if you're like, what is student affairs? Like, what are these functional areas? It lists all of them out. So if you're just like, I'm curious about this, what is it? You nerd, go check it out. Okay, so I'll make sure you get that afterwards. All right. Typically, to work in a college or university setting, it does require at least a bachelor's degree. And then if you want to work directly with college students or like something nerdy like research or other cool things like that, you likely will need a master's or a PhD at some point. Okay, so there's different jobs in a university, and a lot of times it requires at least one degree. So that's a good thing to know if you wanted to go into this field. But I figured that most of the folks on this call are not all dying to go into student affairs and higher ed. Am I right? Okay, and most folks are probably like, I don't even know what this is. Why are you talking about it, right? So that's why I wanted to give a brief context. But ironically, it's kind of meta, right? Like I'm a career coach talking about careers and future. Yeah, that's such a good question, Katie. So if you did want to go into student affairs or higher education, there's a lot of different titles for those degrees. So sometimes it can be like the one I have is the college student personnel, a master's in, that's an actual degree. CSP, college student personnel. Others are called student affairs and higher education administration. Others are higher education and student affairs, like some iteration of those things. So it depends on the focus of the program, but that's actually a great question. If any of you are considering grad school in the future, like if you're like, what's the name of this program? It's likely going to have a lot of different titles for the same thing, but we have to get kind of the gist of what those keywords are. Yeah, great question. Okay, so I figured a lot of you were not like, yes, I want to work in higher education and student affairs. So that's why I wanted to center this more on what are generalizable things, right? And that is not a word, but I made it one. Generalizable things that we can talk about as it relates to careers overall too. Okay, and then maybe one of you will get interested in student affairs too. That's cool. Okay, so with that in mind, if you're like, okay, but why did you like your job? What's cool about it? Tell me more. Sell me on why career coaching specifically within higher ed, why is that cool? So if you wanted to see some values or just some passions of mine, this is what kind of informed that decision. Scarlett loved the dog and so grateful that they're here. I am so grateful. Thank you for following instructions for demonstrating your pets. But okay, so looking at this guy, right? Here's some of the reasons that I found that this was cool. Is anybody else in here pretty interested in education? Or like something working directly with students, maybe in some capacity? Okay, yeah. So again, I just wish I grew up with a mom and all my aunts were English teachers in high school and middle school. So I was like, I know I don't want to do that after helping my mom copy and grade papers all the time. I didn't want that, but I knew I had the heart of an educator. So that's why I've always valued education, but I didn't want to be in, K through 12 necessarily. I also really value social justice. Is anybody else here a social justice nerd that's like, yeah, like I want to talk about systems and what do they mean? Yeah. So I was like, ooh, these nerds in higher ed tend to talk about this a lot more. So I like this environment. And lots of learning opportunities here. So as you can see, there's a bunch of other reasons that I was really interested in this work. But I'm going to invite you all to take out a piece of paper and a pen or a Google Doc or you're not sharing it with anybody. It's just for you. Okay, but I want you to have something that you can do some reflection on for a minute. Okay, so how many of you have heard of Marie Kondo? So get that ready, and I'm just going to ask some questions while you do that. How many of you have heard of Marie Kondo from Netflix? The Magic of Tidying Up. Yeah, Claire's like, I got this. Jess, maybe. There's some knowing smiles. I love it. Ooh, Avery. Yay, awesome. Okay, so The Magic of Tidying Up. This amazing human from Netflix and the world, not just from Netflix, Marie Kondo, she did a lot of research and wrote a book about the magic of tidying up and what sparks joy. So maybe you've seen those memes that are like, this sparks joy, this does not spark joy. That's from that book and those principles. So what I like to encourage students to reflect on, because that's what guided my search too, is what was a moment, it could be in class, out of class, in the last week, in the last month, what was a moment that sparked joy or curiosity for you? Okay, and I'm going to give you 2 whole minutes of silence because I know there's some folks with a preference for introversion. But I want you to take 2 whole minutes to just write down what was a moment that you were like, ooh, this is cool. I could learn about this all day. Or, ooh, I'm on fire. Like, I'm really good at this thing. Okay, it could be maybe you were helping a friend or presenting something or you were researching a specific topic. Okay, so think of a moment that sparked joy or curiosity, and I want you to write it down. No pressure. There's no right answer. Okay, and we'll pause the recording. Okay, so we have some amazing sparks of joy coming in the chat box. And again, it is not a competition. Maybe I really liked petting my dog. I don't have a dog, but if I did, I would feel very much joy if I was petting my dog, right? And that's okay. What I'm trying to get at here is that, did I tell Charlotte what to write down? Did I say, Charlotte, you like this? No, and I can't make you like surgery, right? But you just wrote that down. So sometimes when we're exploring the future or careers, it's easy to gaslight ourselves or second guess and be like, do I like this thing? Or am I just saying that I like it, right? And so a big part of my career coaching is trying to center your agency in that you actually know a lot more than you realize sometimes. Does anybody else feel that way sometimes? We're like, wait, I actually knew a lot. Hang on, what? And so my goal is to ask the right questions as a career coach so that we can elicit some of that confidence and those true things. So we're going to revisit those interests in a minute at the end of this for another activity, okay? So hold on to those, but keep that in mind as a reflection question as you think about, is this really right for me? Or does this spark your curiosity? And it's not going to all the time. Like, I don't love doing math. I'm so glad that we have somebody here that does, but it's still something that we need to keep in mind, right? Of like, okay, if every day I'm super drained, something's got to change, right? Something's got to give. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing with me. This is awesome. I'm really excited to see y'all here. Okay. So, but the nuts and bolts question, right? What do you do? What do I do? How does this work? So if you're like, Kelsey, what is your job description? This is literally pulled from my job description. So if you're like, hey, what do you do as the career education manager for the College of Liberal Arts? Well, I'm going to briefly walk through this. So since I'm in a mid-level leadership role, I have a lot of strategic planning is the biggest part of my job. Right? And that's not what a lot of students think of when they meet me. They're just like, you're here to help. I'm like, yes, but also I'm doing a lot of behind the scenes strategic planning. And I actually support faculty across 18 different departments, from philosophy to dance to economics to sociology. It's this beautiful array of liberal arts degrees, right? That means there's a lot of different constituents that have different needs. And so I have to tailor a strategy across all those folks because I'm one human for 5,000 students, right? I can't meet with all of them. And so I have to help faculty educate themselves so that they can facilitate stuff too. Okay. Other portions is, relationship building. So I think it was Clara who was mentioning like talking with folks, like corresponding with friends overseas. I got to tell you, sometimes wrangling faculty and professors feels like corresponding overseas because they are hard to get a hold of, right? So relationship building, maintaining those, and then doing it in a sustainable way. Direct student services, so presentations or one-on-one appointments is my bread and butter. That's 20% of my job. And then technology and resources and supervision. So I supervise one full-time employee. Okay, so this looks like a very different pie chart from my first job after grad school, where 50% of my job was direct student services, right? But as I move up in an organization, did that happen right away? Was that like my first job after high school? No, it was, I took a few years to gain some experience and then I was qualified for that mid-level, right? So sometimes it takes a while to move up in an organization as you gain different skills. And that's great, that's awesome. But I have another quick question for y'all. So remember those adults in your life, those guardians, those humans that are there? How many of you, and feel free to use an emoji, how many of you could confidently tell me what pie chart they would have for their job? If you're like, I know what my guardian's pie chart would look like. I know what they do. I could give you their job description. Yeah, Charlotte. Awesome. Avery, very cool. I know I could for my mom, but that's because she was a teacher, right? So I had a lot of exposure to teachers, and I was a teacher's kid. So I had to go in and help her. And back in the 90s when you're Xeroxing things still, I'm showing my age, so there's a lot of different things I got to see behind the scenes. But with my dad, who worked at Wonder Bread and didn't go to college and was a delivery truck driver, I didn't really get to see the inside of his job. Right? So different parents or different guardians or different adults that might be in your life, we get different exposure to different careers, right? So a lot of students just see me as I just do appointments and emails, right? Like a lot of it's emails and meetings, and that's true. But it's really hard to understand what a job is. So if any of you are feeling a little lost, like I don't know what a job is, or like I don't really know what I want to do, that's normal. That's okay. All right. So with that, this is just a more accurate description on the bottom right-hand side. You'll see here, what a week. So if you're like, okay, that's a cute pie chart, but what does it mean in an average week? What do I do? And after I just read through this, I'm going to pause here and see if any folks do have questions about specifically me being a career coach. If you're like, what is that like? Or what's the hardest part? You're more than welcome to ask. But yeah, so and my job, if you're like, what do I do every week? It is completely different every day. So sometimes folks are like, well, when are you available? I'm like, I have to look at my very thoroughly color-coded calendar because I could be in a student appointment. I could be in staff meetings. I could be running a committee. I could be doing one-on-ones and all sorts of projects and emails. Yeah, if you hear your parents or guardians comparing or complaining about emails, it's valid. It's valid. Just be kind to them, okay? All right. So with that in mind, Yeah, this is just an average week in my life. Like I said, I could, in the morning, I could meet with a philosophy student who has no idea what they want to do with their life, but they're really excited about their study. And the next hour, I could meet with an economics student who's like, I want to go into finance. How do I do that? And another student who wants to go to grad school. I had one student email me about, hey, I want to go into drag racing. How do I do that? And I'm like, great, I get to go research that and talk to them and help them find connections. Yeah. So that's just a glance. And again, I didn't want to assume that folks were excited too much about career coaching, but if you are, or about similar counseling roles, this is where I just wanted to pause and say, like, do you have any questions for me about my everyday life and my job? And if not, that's absolutely fine. Cool.
Are you ever scared that you gave someone the like told them to do the wrong job?
Oh my gosh, Jess, that's such a good question. Yeah. No, especially early in my career, right? Like when I was a grad assistant, I was 21 and I was just like, hi. And sometimes there would be alumni come in that were like 60 and said, hi, I just got laid off from my job and I have two kids and I'm homeless right now and I need support. How do I apply to jobs? And I also have a disability, right? And so there's a lot of, I think, as I've gotten further in my career, there's a lot of nuances that come with my job, not just for industry, but for people's identities and stories, right? Like, what are the things they carry? How responsible are we? And we also, I mean, we live in a society that requires labor to survive, right? Like, if I don't have a job, I can't pay my rent. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a true thing. And so it can be like a big responsibility to make sure that I'm very awkward and honest, right? Like I have to tell people what I don't know and not pretend that I know everything. My job is to be a resource and be like, okay, I am going to keep gaining knowledge, but if I don't know, I have to find a person who will so that I don't steer them wrong. Yeah, and that takes a lot of humility, right? If I was like, I don't even know where to start. At my last job, I had a student come in and say, I want to study plankton in the Caribbean. And I was like, that's cool. What? And then another student come in and say, I want to be a professional dancer with a company. And I was like, great. So I have to be willing to be humble and admit what I know and what I don't know, and to keep building resources and knowledge so that I can be prepared for whoever comes in my door. Yeah, that's such a good question. I was terrified in the beginning. Oh my gosh.
Kelsey, we got a question from Avery about what is your favorite part of your job?
Oh, okay. Well, that's such a sweet question. I genuinely didn't think folks would have questions. So I was like, oh my gosh, okay. Yes. And I know that's so silly because students are so kind and sweet. Yeah, so my favorite part of my job. So if it was 5 years ago and I was just starting, I would definitely say my student interactions. And I still say that that is a huge thing that I love to do. However, I've been doing this for about 7 years now. And so the topics, even though it's unique every time and each person has a unique story, I think what I enjoy most now about my job is when I get to have like a big strategic, like, like it's not just me delivering content, but because I'm in a leadership role, leading faculty to do the things that like now I'm going to have an impact of 10 people delivering things instead of just me, right? Like I'm building minions and that's exciting. So yeah, like I did a workshop right before break with faculty that I genuinely didn't think anybody was going to come to. I was like, well, I mean, you said you wanted early career education ideas for the classroom. It's finals week, you're busy, but why not? 40 people came and I was like, y'all are busy. Why are you here? Like, okay. And they actually found it helpful and they're actually going to do this. So yeah, so it's exciting to not just see my direct impact, but in a leadership capacity, see that bigger role. Yeah. And of course, nerdy students. Yes. Okay. Any last questions? And then I want to make sure we have time for your activities. This is so fun.
Yeah, I have just one question. So does basically every college have a career consulting or student affairs and all that?
Yeah.
Just
yeah,
about every college has one.
So in the US in particular, now I will not get super higher education nerd on you, but Harvard, Yale, all those things were kind of the first universities in the US. And since the 1600s, it's evolved just a bit, right? Like initially higher ed was just to recruit clergymen and church people and men, only white men, to work as clergymen and religious leaders. Do you think college is a bit different now? Yeah, right. So now universities have had to evolve and they have a lot more identity-based resources and networking, and they have career services. So if you decide to go to college, which we're going to talk about in a minute, like what are the pros and cons of going and when your life is not over if you just don't decide to go to college right away. That's just fine, right? And we'll talk about what that might be. And there might be some barriers that you might encounter without a bachelor's degree in the US specifically. Okay, just because of our economy and the job market. So with that in mind, if you decide to go to college and you go, whether it's community college, universities, 4-year, 2-year, I don't care where, go to your career center. We are not scary. We are actually here to help and make it less stressful. And I know that there's this bit, like I always joke with my students that they probably felt like they were coming to a dentist's office because I'm some random stranger in a massive university, right? Like I know that I have to build trust with them. And so my job is to be as available as possible. And again, in spaces where I might not be seen. But regardless, like it's such a great make it a pit stop, right? And even in your first year, we'll talk about how you can set yourself up for success. You're going to live if you don't ever use it, but I think it's a very helpful tool that can probably reduce your stress if any of you are feeling a little bit stressed about the future. Yes, we're not scary. Okay. And we're not just for seniors. I mean that, seniors in college. We're not just for seniors. Please believe me. Yes, the seniors come in and they're like, wait, I should have talked to you years ago. Yes, but that's why we're here now. All right. So, any last questions about being a career coach? It's okay if not. Okay, awesome. Are you ready to do some activities? Yeah? Okay, so first, we're going to do some career mythbusters. Dun, dun, dun. And of course, I have saved it in a document that is not here right now. So 1 second. So let me open it real quick. Okay, perfect. So my first question, and you can unmute or put it in the chat. What is a career? What is that? What is that newfangled thing? I promise I'll tell you if you're wrong. There's no such thing as silly answers, I promise. There's the answer in the chat. A type of job. Thank you, Clemmer. Yes. What else is a career? Or what's the difference between a job and a career? A passion? Yeah. An occupation? Absolutely. Okay. So I don't think that there's one exact answer, right? And that's always my thing. There's no one right way and one wrong way to do it. And if somebody tells you that, run. Okay, if they're like, this is the only way to do this, be like, like that, I usually steer clear. Yeah, a career isn't like a stable job, spark joy in your life. Okay, and we can talk about that, right? So I also work with art students, right, who love art, and that is their, like, who they are as a person in addition to their career, right? How they make money and pay the rent. So I just want to emphasize, especially for folks who identify as women in here, you get to determine what a career is to you. Okay. For some folks, yeah, something you work towards long term, beautiful. Yeah. So it can be like, maybe some of you are like, in 20 years, I still have a vision of what I want to be. And some of you, it might be, I want to pay my bills so that I can live and exist and then do what I want. And that's awesome. It doesn't have to be your passion, or it totally could be. Typically, to survive in the US and pay rent like a stable adult, and have benefits, right? It usually means access to different resources, right? So typically it's about 40 plus hours a week of your life, and how you want to spend it is up to you. You know, I have some students who will travel and work remotely the whole time. I have other students who are like, I'm going to work at Starbucks so I can pay my rent and then do this. I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. Any of those choices are valid. But it's a series of transitions. It's not, I have to get my job and I have to know exactly what I want to do, and it's going to be 45 years in this one company, right? It can be a series of transitions, and what's next, what makes sense to me. Okay. All right. And then who, out of curiosity, and feel free to put in the chat, if today I said, who would you turn to for career support? If you're like, I just don't know what I want to do, who would you go to? Who's the person you would go to? Fill me in. I have a hunch. Mom, yep, counselors and parents. Mom, Mi familia, love it. Mama bears all around. My best friend's mom, yes. Postgrad office and parents. Parents, absolutely. Okay, so this is what I see with my students too. is the most common thing that students go to, for most common resource that folks go to, is their parents or guardians, adults in their life, right? Now, and then the second person they go to is like staff or faculty, and then career counseling is the last one. They're like, oh yeah, and you're here, right? And why does that make sense? Why do you go to your parents first? Go for it, Charlotte.
Maybe because they've like had experience and they've already gone through it for the most part.
Yeah. Clemmer, did you mean that you just see them? Yeah. So
Because you trust them.
because you trust them and they know you, right? Like they have a relationship with you, of course. Now, for me, as a queer person, I didn't always have the best relationship with my parents, right? Like I don't have strong connections with them all the time, and it wasn't always a safe place to go for advice. And I never felt like I had a queer person in my small rural town where I was from that I could find and like talk to and talk about these things with. And so sometimes it can be hard to find a mentor, somebody that you feel like does trust you, or you can confide and feel like you can be yourself. Or maybe sometimes, although our parents love us, hopefully, right? Sometimes they want us to do what they did, right? Because that's what they feel safe with. They want you to be successful. And so they're going to give you advice that was relevant for them. But just going to give a quick example. When I was in Girl Scouts, I was doing door-to-door sales, right? Knocking on doors in my neighborhood like a sketchy weirdo, being like, hi, Girl Scout cookies. And how successful do you think I was at selling Girl Scout cookies? Not so great, right? Maybe not so helpful. A lot of times my students will come in and they say, my dad said that I'm supposed to knock on doors and call companies and ask them if they would hire me. And I was like, and how's that been going so far, right? So sometimes our parents are amazing partners in our life. They know you, they have trust in you. And the role that they play in your career transitions might need to shift as you get older, right? So like maybe they're your cheerleader, or maybe your parents are really good at grammar and your guardians are really good at grammar and they can help grade those assignments. Or they're like, oh, don't you remember when you did that thing in Girl Scouts? And they can help remind you of things. But eventually we want to talk to folks that are also in the industries we want to go into, or also have experiences maybe with identities that we want to explore, right? So knowing that we can say, yes, my family is very important to me, and then maybe I can explore and they can play a different role. And maybe we have to tell mom no sometimes. I'm sorry if there's a mom in the room, but sometimes we have to say, hey mom, I don't want to be a doctor. Like that's a very hard conversation sometimes. So just know that those are normal transitions, again, as part of a life transition and as you age and make those decisions for yourself. And those people are very important to us. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing. We're going to launch a couple polls thanks to Katie, because we're going to do the last portion is myth busting. All right, so Katie, oh wait, no, I forgot. I'm going to do the polls. I lied. I'm going to do the polls. All right, so I'm going to launch this poll. How many of you have thought, everyone else knows what they're doing, or I'm behind when it comes to thinking about the future? And it's okay if you're like, no, I'm so much swagger. I have never thought that. I need to talk to you. Like my therapist needs to get in touch. Okay, awesome. All right, wait a little bit longer. Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to end this poll. Now, if 14 out of 19 of you have felt behind, can we all just be behind together? Yeah, let's just assume that there is no behind, that there is no ahead. And yes, there are things you can do to be a bit more prepared, right? Like we all know, like if I don't ever study for my exam and I show up the day of and I'm like, I'm fine, right? Like probably not going to be as fine, Shelby, like it's probably not going to go so well. But in the meantime, wherever you're at, you're right on time. And no matter where you are, we just need to take the next step, okay? So the comparison Olympics are not very helpful, and I've only seen them drag students down. So it's normal to feel this way. Don't judge yourself for feeling your feelings. It's just know that this is a normal thing and there's no such thing as behind. You're right on time. Okay, which is what I have to tell my students all the time because they're afraid I'm going to judge them. Alrighty, our last poll for this section. If you decide to go to college, alrighty. Oh, that's okay, Chesney. No problem. If you decide to go to college, does your major determine your career? Is that a myth or is that a fact? Remember, you're talking to a liberal arts career coach. Oh, we've got 14, 15. Oh, so exciting. People are very, very strong in this one. I love it. Okay. I'm going to end poll. 22 of you responded, and only one person was like, yeah, I think it's a fact. Now, where might this be true? What factor does your major in college determine a career? Why might that be important?
There are some careers in which you need a certain degree. Like you can't be a doctor without like a medical degree.
Exactly, right? Like I need that certification, but do you think that you're going to get a doctor degree at a bachelor level? No, you just need to meet the prerequisites for that medical degree, right? To get into that medical program. I have a theater major who is now a doctor. Okay, he just took a biology minor and was like, all right, let me just knock this out, but I want to do this. Okay, so if you decide to study something and you're like, wait, I just like the classes, but I don't know if I want to do this as a jobby job, then don't do it as a jobby job. That's okay. You get to change your mind. And do you think some of you have some interests that have changed since maybe 10 years ago? Do you think maybe you have the same priorities and interests as you did 10 years ago? And do you know yourself in the same way? I really hope not. Right? Like, I hope that you've changed like a little bit. And some of you are like, no, I'm going to be a doctor and there's nothing that's standing in my way. And that's just awesome and fine. You nerdy engineers and doctors and artists or whatever thing you've latched onto. However, you're still going to find, like, I knew college students was my jam, but I didn't know in what way, right? So there's going to be nuance and transitions, and we're just figuring out what's the next right thing. What's the next right step? Does that make sense? Okay, so we don't need to have it all figured out all at once, but we need to say, what's my next question? What's this next transition that I'm going to be facing? Okay, any last career myths or fears, questions you wanted to put out there? They're like, I was just wondering about, like, that's totally fine. If you're like, that's too vulnerable, you can put it in the chat, private chat me, and I'll try and get it at the end. Okay, so if you have any vulnerable, like, I have this fear or question, I don't know if I want to share it, direct message me. Okay. Here's some notes I want you to take for yourself. Okay. So this is something that I tend to emphasize in every appointment with students. And there's a lot of text, so don't feel like you have to read it all. But just know that you're doing the best you can with what you know right now. So there might be some transition points. I don't know why I became a hall director. I know why I did at the time, but if I could do it all over again, I definitely wouldn't, right? I was doing what I knew at the time was best for me. And now I know better, and now I'm going to do things differently, right? So please give yourself some grace. And what is it? You have a 100% survival rate for everything you've gone through so far. And I don't say that flippantly. I say that especially for folks that were experiencing some of the fires in the last few weeks and everything. We've been in a global panini, which is a global traumatic experience, okay? We have made it through. This is a lot, and you have a lot on your plate. It's okay if you don't have everything out. All right, it's okay. The last piece I wanted to mention in terms of making an informed and thoughtful decision. Some of us have identities that have informed, and when I say identity, I mean like, what's my race, or what's my gender, or what's my sexuality? There's a lot of different, those are some examples of identities. So sometimes with our different identities, we receive different messages from the world, right? About what we're capable of. Some of you might not have parents or guardians in your life that went to college. And so you're like, I don't know if I want to do that or how to navigate it. And so each of us has a different set of playing cards that we're playing this game with. And it's kind of rigged, right? It's not super fair. So I just want you to know that if you're like, oh my gosh, like I have a disability and I don't know if I should talk about it, or I feel like I experienced maybe like somebody said something sketchy to me in an interview, but I don't know, or I felt weird about this thing, like you're not weird. That's systems that are weird. And those systems need to do better. And if you're like, but then what do I do? That's when you go in and get support. Okay? So it's not your fault. It's just really gross and weird. Sometimes job stuff's weird. One person asked this question actually, and I just want to follow up because it's related to this. They said, well, what if we have a career that we want, but we just can't get a job in it? That's very common, right? So again, global panini, not so great with the economy. Some folks are like, my dream was to be this, and now that doesn't even exist anymore. Like I wanted to be a concert singer, and I'm like, yeah, sorry, Tina, like that's probably not going so well right now. So typically what I recommend are a couple things. One, remember that finding a job is a game and it's rigged. Okay, there's lots of hidden rules. How many of you feel like I wanted to apply for a job but it said I need 10 years experience? Yeah, how am I supposed to get experience without experience, right? And you are 16 times more likely to get an interview if you have a personal connection at an organization. Ew, right? Ew. What if I don't have that, right? So that's why knowing those games and like some of the rigged parts of it, we can now get informed with resources and strategies for how to approach it so that we don't get lost in the dust. So for example, if you're like, I can't get a job in this, well, yeah, maybe because you're in high school and you're not qualified to go treat people in a medical setting, right? But maybe I can volunteer at an organization, or I can find a stranger who works at that organization and talk to them about it. And in addition, I can get other surrounding experiences that build my skill set that get me prepared for this thing. Okay. But in general, in a global panini, I like to have two career paths in mind at all times because we don't know what could happen. Maybe your dream was to be a Lyft driver. Oops. Right? You know, I have friends that worked in theater and were out of work for 2 years and ended up working in a COVID lab doing testing. And they were like, I never saw myself here. So having two career paths in mind, or tasks or job, like tasks that you enjoy, those can give you clarity. And so you can find different opportunities that might resonate with you. Is that helpful? Okay, cool. So you can do it. We can navigate it. It just might not be exactly what we thought it was. Yeah. All right. So in our last finest moments, I have some activities. It appears that we only have 6 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have time. So here's my backup strategy. I have a comment in there. Okay, I think I want to spend more time on the questions, and then how about I send these activities as follow-ups so that y'all can do them on your own time. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay, cool. I just want to make sure we have time together and we can answer this stuff. So I'll answer this question, and then I'm going to give a brief overview of the activities so you know what's up and why I'm asking you to do them. Okay, so first question, if I go to a more advanced college, like a D1 or Stanford, does that always mean they're better or smarter than you? What do you all think? And why are we shaking our heads no?
It's an
It just means
absolute.
it's a different path.
It's a different path. Thank you, Clemmer. Yeah, because there's no one right way, right? Jess, what were you saying?
Nothing's ever like 100% right or wrong. So like even though Harvard's like a great school, it's probably not a good school for certain majors. So it's not like a perfect school for everybody.
Yes. So here's the thing. I am not in admissions. I don't get paid to talk about admissions, but I'm just going to tell you from a career coach's perspective something that might be helpful to consider. I want you to pick a college or university if you decide to go that makes sense to you, right? Knowing that you feel at home and belonging, a sense of belonging, that's my job in student affairs, right? That students feel like a sense that they matter and they belong on a campus. Because if you go to a university and you're not thriving outside of the classroom, I can guarantee that you are not going to want to stick around and complete classes and do well, right? So that's just what I've seen from the students who come to me saying, I don't know if I want to stay here. It's because they felt like there isn't anything here for me community-wise. And so typically what I think about when I'm paying for a degree, which is very expensive, is what are the resources that this degree offers, right? So something that Stanford is awesome with, like Jess said, there's certain programs that they probably have very astute things. Also, you're getting to be in community with pretty wealthy people, right, who are going to the institution. So naturally, your networks and your community might be in touch with those folks that have access to more opportunities. So those are some things that are awesome and good to pay attention to. But if you're like, I can't afford that price tag, you need a bachelor's degree. I went to community college for 2 years and then finished my degree because it was more affordable. Does that mean that I'm not as smart or that I'm not as capable? No, we're playing the game based on what I'm paying. And then I made a job pay for my further certifications so that now I'm like, honey, like if you would like to be qualified in the field that you want to go into, that's what matters. So if you are trying to get into prestigious programs like law or medicine, sometimes the name and the label does matter more because it's just more competitive. But in general, it's related to the networking and resources that you'd get access to. And I want you to do what makes sense based on the sticker price and your sense of belonging there. Okay, cool. Personally, I really love working at CSU, and this is not a plug for them in any way. It's just I've worked at a lot of different types of institutions, as you can see. Some of them were small private, others were large public, some were small public, etc. I love CSU because it's a land grant institution, which means that its mission is centered on making more access to higher education for students and for the state of Colorado, which I'm like, Yeah. So yes, I have students that are like, we have way more first gen students, and we have students who wouldn't have otherwise access to college education. And I think that's awesome. I would rather be a part of that organization, but that might not be what you need for your college, and that's okay. All right. And again, we don't do comparison Olympics. It's not helpful. So I'm going to stop talking because I get too excited. Apologies. Let me briefly explain these 3 activities so that when I send you the handouts, you know what's up, and then we have time for questions, okay? Awesome. So originally we were going to have some optional breakout rooms. It was going to be super cute, but it's fine. I'm over it with these 3 options. So as you think about, take out that piece of paper again. Por favor. Please take out that piece of paper, the one that you wrote your Sparks of Joy on. And I want you to write down, what is your next career transition? So if you're like, I have to choose whether or not I'm going to college. Great. If you're like, I'm choosing which college. Great. I'm choosing a major, or I don't know what I want to do and I want to figure that out. Great. So what is your next career transition or question? Write that thing down. I'm going to cheat. Dang it. Nope. It's okay. Write that down. Okay, so what's your next career transition? Okay. So you're like, graduate high school, great, but then I want you to clarify that of like, graduate high school and figure out what I want to do, or and go to college and figure out that transition, okay? Now, I want you to write down, what do I need to support me in this transition? Okay, and I'm going to give you some options. If you're like, I don't know what I need, that's okay. That's my job, is to ask the right questions. Typically, folks that come to me and ask those questions, I give them one of 3 options, and that's what I'm laying out here. Sometimes they're like, I just need some brainstorming space. Like if I'm figuring out what I want to do, I just want to like get creative and like think about different stuff. So that's when I recommend doing a mind map. So you can actually do a mind map of like, what are careers? And like, what comes to mind? Like, what are my sparks of joy? What are my connections? And I'll copy paste the instructions in the chat right after this. So maybe brainstorming it out and thinking through it. Option 2, you're like, okay, I know what I want to do, like Clemmer, and you just can't get experience in it, right? So you're like, okay, how do I find experiences? So for example, I would recommend that you'd go to idealist.org or indeed.org, indeed.com. I'll send these afterwards, I promise. I don't want to scare you. But go to one of those websites to find one experience that you think is cool. And what will it take to get into that experience? Is it volunteering? Is it, like, I know I want to, like, maybe you find a cool job that you're not qualified for right now, but you're like, but how could I get qualified? And then we make a map for how to get there. Okay? Awesome. Lastly, folks are like, I need to talk to strangers who are doing the cool things. I don't know anybody who's doing the thing I want to do. Great. I will help you find strangers on the internet in a very safe way for any parents listening, but in a safe way where we can have something called an informational interview. So that's where you're probably doing it already when you talk to folks, but that's the official term when you can say, hey, stranger on the internet, I think you're cool and I want to know how you got to where you are, and do you like it? Do you not? It's basically going to these series and coming to these kind of events helps clarify a lot of those questions, right? So coming to events like this or connecting with strangers that are doing things you think are cool can be a really powerful way to explore the future and get prepared. Okay, so again, I assure you that I will send you all the instructions. I just don't know how to make it look good right now, so give me a minute. Okay. With that, if you're like, okay, but Kelsey, like, what do I do right now? Like, what can I do next? What are some sample action steps? I'm like, I got you. So if you're like, I just don't know who I am, or I'm just having a tough time with life right now, which makes sense. It's normal. Maybe if you're a writer like me and you enjoy writing and reflecting in a journal, maybe do some sparks of joy or curiosity journaling for a month just to see and be like, what was a moment that sparked joy or curiosity for you? Why? Right? Why did you actually light up about it? Because that'll tell you a lot more than the thing itself. If I was like, I pet my dog. Oh, but it's because I was feeling kind of sad and I wanted to feel connected, right? Like, okay, we can actually plug that into a job search engine. You can put animals or social justice or whatever. There's no rules. Put those keywords into a job search engine, right? So anyway, journaling for a month. You can do a value sort, which is what I'm going to send afterwards. Here's a sample one. There's a million on the internet too. You can just Google value sort and they'll have a bunch of options. You could do a mind map like we talked about, or find 2 people to have an informational interview with. If you're like, I think I want to do this thing, but what if I hate it? Great. Talk to 2 strangers who are doing it already and just ask them about their insights. Okay. So that is all I have. I know that we are overtime, apologies. But if you have any other questions, I have put my email right down there at the bottom. So again, don't be shy to reach out. I just want you to change the world. That's it. Okay, that's it. And I believe Katie has something as a follow-up to share. But yeah, so I apologize that we went over time. I got too excited. But thank you so much for being here. And hopefully there's some action step or resource that will be helpful for you. While Katie's doing that, I'm going to copy paste that stuff in the chat box like I promised.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Kelsey. It was awesome to listen to everything. And hope, girls, that you have a few nuggets that you could take away, if not the whole lot of nuggets to take away, to help, just sort of plan your futures and your leap into college. And thanks, I can see that in the chat. That's awesome. So I am going to do another little poll. And I'm also going to share my screen. And just, I just want to also thank College Invest. College Invest, as I was telling you at the beginning, is an investment company where your caregivers, parents, and things can invest their money towards your college education. And it's a wonderful resource for advancing you into your college careers. So here is our launch of the final after our first Inspiring Futures. If you could fill out these questions, I would greatly appreciate it. Awesome. Looks like everybody is feeling a little pumped and energized for their futures, which is our biggest goal for Inspiring Futures and our series. And that all of you will sort of walk away from each one of these Inspiring Futures feeling a little more informed about what kind of jobs are out there, and your college and pathway and your career pathway, because as we learned from Kelsey, it's kind of a moving thing and growing and changing all the time. So awesome. And I'll share your results so you guys can see what that. So awesome. There.
Thanks so much, everybody. This was super fun.
Yeah. Does anybody have any last questions that they want to, well, we've got some time, and Kelsey, thank you so much for sharing your email address that, girls can connect with you and ask some more questions. So, and I also have, for any caregivers that are on the call, I have a information that I'll be sending out to you all after this call that will have a form where you can fill out and just say, what you learned and what you liked. And there's also a patch that we have, a custom patch for the Inspiring Future series. And so you'll see on that form the patch and what you can get from the patch, and we'll mail it out to you and everything like that. So hope everybody enjoyed their evening with Kelsey. And again, thank you so much. It was so informational. And we have more Inspiring Futures coming up. We've got a travel advisor. We have someone from the Museum of Nature and Science. We have a paleontologist. We have a woman from NASCAR racing and is an auto mechanic, travel advisor, photographer. We've got a whole range of different types of professions and career pathways. So it's going to be a pretty amazing series. So thanks, everybody. Have an awesome night, and we'll see you later.